David and I and Adam, a friend of mine, we were together and we were hanging out over dinner. And just as pastors, we were kind of having this conversation of what does it mean to be righteous and pure? And we had this really, I think, this personal moment that we're now making public. But that's kind of what pastors do, where we begin to talk about just the pressures and the temptation that exists everywhere in our culture with pornography. And I began to share that, in the first 18 years of my life, I grew up pre-internet. Yeah, I am actually that old. I'm that old. And so for me, I had no exposure to pornography. I heard about it, but I would have to go to like a 7-Eleven store and buy it, and I was actually too young to buy it. And so the access was low and the temptation was low, and it wasn't part of my life. It's actually in the last 18 years that the temptation has risen in my life and that you feel the pressure. And this last year, I was actually listening to you and Mark teach at summer camp, and both of you addressed this issue so squarely. And as we sat there at the dinner table, you began to share a little bit of your story. And I felt like you were leading me and helping me deal with some of these temptations. So would you share that with us?
Yeah. Like I said, my name's David. And when I was about 12 years old, I began to be introduced to pornography or sexual addiction. And it was really something that I grew up in the church. My grandpa was a pastor. My parents were devout in the church. And there was this moment at 12 when it became something that was reoccurring in my life. And I was thinking, like, I'll handle it later. This is something I can take care of later. So 8.5 years later, I finally had a chance to get freed from that. But it was an 8.5 year addiction that I carried with myself. And the implications were huge. The shame that came with it was huge. Just the hurt and the brokenness and just the struggles that came along with it are pervasive, and they were going to follow me for the rest of my life because of things that I entered into at 12 years old.
Mm-hmm. And what I love about David, and I've heard Mark do this as well, and I think they're leading the next wave in this area, is you've said this will not be something that our kids deal with in darkness. This isn't going to be something that we leave in the darkness. This is going to be something that we bring into the light, and we're going to allow the gospel to transform it. Now talk to us, what's your gospel, or how do you handle this temptation?
Yeah, well, it's something that I've seen grow, and I've been in ministry for 3.5 years now, and I've seen probably 80-90% of the men I've worked with struggle with it in some realm. And also, one thing I learned was that women are actually the fastest growing demographic of pornography viewers. And so that's something that I've also seen grow up as high school students come forward and say, this is something I struggle with, and these are things that have broken families, and I've seen my best friends' families fall apart because their dad's addiction to pornography. And it's something that really grew in my heart, and that's something for me I don't want to allow to slip back in ever. And so I've come up with like 5 steps in my life that I've seen at age 12, that I saw at age 15, that I saw at age 18, that I've seen men at age 25, 30, 40, that they go through before they fall back into it. And the first step I just call reality. The fact that things are sexualized, attraction happens, and our hearts need to be guarded. Job says that I made a covenant with my eyes that I will not look at a woman lustfully. And for me, that's just the line where we draw. We're all in reality. There's attraction, there's sexualization, and it's something that we need to watch out for. And then the next step I call linger. Linger goes from appreciation to desire. Linger is that stage where you see somebody and you kind of watch for a little bit. You're online, you're going through Facebook, you see for a little bit. Linger can also be emotional and mental. I know people, pastors even, who have had emotional affairs. And it goes that when you're with your spouse, that you're still thinking and lingering on that conversation you had with that one person. And so what I've seen is that when you begin to linger, things start to get your attention. And that's why I think Paul says so clearly that you need to run from sexual immorality, that you need to flee from it. And then what happens is it gets your attention, you linger, and then it gets your affection, and that comes to longing. And longing's when you're kind of desiring it more. Longing's when your spouse is no longer your standard of beauty. I wrote that longing is that escalation. It's that discontentment with what you have. In Psalms it says, as deer long for streams of water, so my soul longs for you. And the thing that I learned was your heart can only long for one thing. It can only long for one thing. And for me, for so long, it was just longing for pornography, longing for sexual things, longing for things that aren't God. And what happens is we get your attention, gets your affection, and eventually it gets your heart. And that's when step 4 comes in, and that's pursuit. And you begin to think about it and long for it and desire it. And I've seen this happen time after time after time. And it goes from longing to, I'm thinking about this, I want it, to pursuit. And then pursuit eventually leads to addiction. And addiction traps you, and it holds you. And I heard a friend of mine say that what happens on the internet doesn't stay on the internet. What happens in your eyes and in your mind doesn't stay, and it comes and affects and invades every part of your life.
So David, I'm guessing that probably there's people here looking at the list going, I'm on step 1, I'm 2, I'm 3.
Mm-hmm.
And what was the moment, you said you dealt with this for 8 years.
Mm-hmm.
What was the moment where you knew you could be free of this?
Yeah. I was sitting down, and so again, pornography is something that's come with a great amount of shame and guilt in my life. Growing up in the church, feeling like I need to get right with this before I can come to God, or I need to deal with this before I can feel like I'm right again. And I remember having to sit down with my now wife, then girlfriend, Melissa. And it was one of those moments where I knew I had to tell her that I'd struggled. I knew I had to tell her that it's something that's been a part of my life. And I knew I had to have this conversation with her. And just to think about the amount of shame and guilt that I had on my heart, and the amount of shame and guilt that I had coming into it, and the reaction that I wasn't sure that was going to come. But I've never seen the gospel so clearly portrayed in a person. I remember saying to her, Melissa, I struggle with this. And she looks at me and she goes, I know, I've known, and I love you. I know, I've known, and I love you. And for me, that was that moment where all this guilt and shame and bitterness and frustration and anger with myself, it just dropped. And I was like, this is stupid, I'm done. I'm done, no more. And so we constantly have conversations of, where are you? Are you in these steps? Are you at linger? Are you at longing? How can we protect it? How can we protect our heart? And my prayer is that those of you who struggle with something along those lines would come forward, and those of you who are on the receiving end would share the gospel the way my wife did. And my prayers are that young men would be able to have conversations with their fathers, and young women would be able to have conversations with their mothers, and that we'd be a church that keeps things in the light.
That's good. Thank you for sharing it so much, David. Thank you.